Welcome to Her Love of Sports with your host, Katie Hamilton.
Hey everyone, welcome to Her Love of Sports, where we are highlighting and promoting professional women in sports. My name is Katie Hamilton. I'm a technical soccer coach, sports reporter, and the host of Her Love of Sports. We look forward to bringing to you interviews and in-depth discussions with professional athletes, coaches, and much more. My guest today I've known for just over 2 years now. I first met Katherine when I started working for a professional soccer club, and I had the opportunity to work closely with her during the live broadcasts. Katherine is the Western Canadian representative for MediaPro, which broadcasts professional matches. Instantly, when I met her, I thought, wow, what an inspiring and powerful woman in the industry. Since then, I've had the privilege of learning from her and able to work with her. I'd like to introduce you to Katherine Davies. Katherine, thank you for being here on Her Love of Sports.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so let's kick it off. How did you start your sports journey?
Well, it's a very long and varied trajectory. I went to school in Vancouver, and I did every sport going at school, but it wasn't something that was really encouraged at school or in my family. It was, we were encouraged to do an academic career, go to university, be professionals at something, and then I'd always done a lot of running. I ran almost every day from the age of 13 as sort of a way to de-stress and keep fit and all that. And then I ended up, through my academic career, going to Spain, where I was doing a PhD in history, and I'd already done a couple of triathlons for fun. My first one was at Jericho Beach in Vancouver back, years ago, and triathlon was just starting up there. And I thought, oh, that's fun. I've done one. And I didn't have a bike because I was a student. So I went to a bike store and told them a big story about how I was, Canadian and I'd done triathlons. And so they gave me a bike. It was very exciting. And then I started training, and I met a lot of people. And it was really an issue of being in the right place at the right time, because triathlon was starting up there. The Spanish triathlon is really strong. Mm-hmm. And I was racing, and after a couple of races, I started winning, and I was always like in the top 10 or so, men and women combined. And then in 90, I think it was 89 or 90, we had the ITU, the World Triathlon Federation, was formed by a Canadian who I knew. And then the Spanish were very involved in that, and I wanted to race in the national team, so I ended up getting a passport given to me.
Wow.
That 1 year, there was an NBA player who was given a Spanish passport, an Iranian refugee, and me. And so I got a Spanish passport, and I raced for the Spanish national team, and 3 world championships, I think, and a couple of European championships, and the first ITU World Cup, which was very exciting in 1991. Traveled the world, everything was paid for. I got a salary, I had sponsorship.
How old were you when this all started?
I was in my mid-20s. So
okay. Yeah.
1991, and it was utterly fabulous. Those early sort of bandit days of triathlon. I remember racing in Spain, and we go through a field and there were bulls there, or there was a forest fire and everybody had to stop on the bike, and so the entire field of 300 people were stopped on a road waiting for the fire trucks to go by, and just things like that, where it was just the early days, and it was brilliant. And then as an athlete, that was my pinnacle, I guess. I raced in the 1991 Triathlon World Cup in the Gold Coast in Australia, and I came 5th, and I was 3rd in the first ever Triathlon World Cup. And had a few podiums in European championships and the European Cup. And then my coach ended up being my partner, and I ended up getting pregnant and having a baby. So that sort of made my career take a different course. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I ended up doing a lot of the on-screen commentating for the television programs that were on Eurosport worldwide, Eurosport, and then that were sold to broadcasters around the world. And then I did a lot of the presenting and hosting of the Triathlon World Cup programs. Wow. And it's a lot of TV work. And then I went into journalism, because I had a background in writing and business and finance and all that. So I went into financial journalism, and mostly about the business of sport, and ended up working for a number of industry publications, and then I ended up in a MP and Silva, which was it was the biggest agency in the world of football media rights until it went bankrupt a couple of years ago. So that was in London. In London, I spent most of the last 30 years in Europe, and 20 of them in London. Yeah.
Wow.
So
let's go back to when you got pregnant and had your baby.
Yeah.
So did you continue doing the triathlons after you gave birth, or was that kind of the end of it? Because I know that lots of female athletes go through this. I mean, Alex Morgan on the U.S. soccer team just had a baby. She's already back training for the Olympics. What was that road to getting back to where you were after birth?
Well, I trained all the way through my pregnancy. It was quite difficult when I'd been on the national team and my coach was the national team coach. And then all of a sudden I was pregnant and couldn't do anything. It's like, what am I doing? I didn't really want to be pregnant, hadn't planned to be. And then I had my son, who is just, the best thing that's ever happened to me. And so that changed things. But I did keep on racing. And I actually did my first triathlon 6 weeks after he was born. And I won it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I beat a lot of guys too. I think that was a bit of a blow to the men. It's
totally.
like, she just had a baby and she beat me. But I continued racing for about another year and a half, I think. I traveled the world and all that. But it was just, having a child changes your perspective. I just didn't want to be away. I didn't want to do the traveling. I didn't want to achieve those peaks anymore. And at the time I was part of the Spanish triathlon squad that was training for the first Olympics, which were supposed to be in 1996. The triathlon was named to the Olympic program for 96, and I was excited about that. My son was born in 93. And then you're just your values and your perspectives change. And then triathlon was moved to 2000. It debuted in the Olympics in 2000. I thought, well, I can't hang on. I'm going to go, do something else.
Yeah, that's a long time to...
It's a long time to keep training when you have a child.
Yeah.
And so I changed my focus and got more into the business of sport, media, television, journalism. I did a lot of consulting and things like that. And so that worked out really well. And I was able to keep my foot in the door and to see what was going on, but work more sort of behind the scenes, under the radar, which is what I like to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you were training, do you have any stories or when you were at triathlon, did you have any stories?
Of things that are unusual or different?
Or anything, yeah.
Well, my favorite story, which I tell a lot, is I was doing it was the Iberian Triathlon Championships, which is Spain and Portugal, in 1993 or 4, and it was in the south of Portugal, in the Algarve. And it was a really exciting race because during the bike you crossed over between Spain and Portugal, over the border, so it was an international triathlon. But I did very well. I came 4th overall out of everybody, so I was the first woman. But there were only 3 men ahead of me. But the first 10 men, so that was 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and then 5th, 6th, 7th, they up to 11th, they all got big cash prizes. And I was the 4th person overall, first woman, and I got a hairdryer.
Oh my gosh.
And that was sort of what it was like back then. But I was quite proud of that because after that they realized, well, this is silly. We can't give her a hairdryer. And all the men who came behind me got, $1,000, $5,000. So I think that was instrumental in changing people's views and okay, these women are actually really good and they can race alongside the men and they can beat a lot of them. And together with Marisol Casado, she's now an IOC member of the International Olympic Committee, and she's the president of World Triathlon. And she was president of the Spanish Triathlon Federation at the time, and she was there. And she was instrumental in making sure that there was equal prize money for men and women from 1st to 10th place. And a lot of people didn't agree with that. They said, well, the women who are 10th, they're just so much worse than the men who are 10th. And that wasn't the point. It has to be equal. And it was equal from that point. And World Triathlon always had equal prize money from 1st to 10th place. Even if there were only 10 women in the whole field and there were 100 men, it was always equal prize money. And so I did feel that I was a part of that process to make sure that there was equal prize money and that women were treated equally. And because I was foreign in Spain and Portugal, even though I had a Spanish passport, I got a lot of media attention. And so it helped to put women in this particular sport in the spotlight. And so that was, there were a lot of funny stories along the way, but I'm quite proud of that, about helping to bring a bit more equality into the sport.
Do you think that they weren't expecting a woman to come in the top 10?
No.
And then here we have a woman, and our first prize, we thought maybe she'd come in the 20th, and she's coming in 4th. Here's her hairdryer.
Yeah.
So they weren't prepared to have a woman kill it and come in 4th place and beat all these men.
They had no idea. And I think the Portuguese women at the time hadn't had that kind of support, and maybe they didn't do sport in school at the time, and so they weren't as good. Some Portuguese women have become very, very good since then, and they have a very strong triathlon school, and that women are treated equally, and there's equal prize money. But at that time, they just thought the women was like a secondary category. Like you have the men, and then you have like the U17s and U15s. Women was sort of a lesser category of the men's. And I think they didn't expect a woman to do that well. And that from that point, they started to see it as the men's and the women's race. not the women's as sort of a subcategory of the overall race.
Right. Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
And then you transitioned into more of the broadcast and the media side.
Yeah.
Of things in the behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, I was in front of the camera for the first 2 or 3 Triathlon World Cups. Not the first one because I raced in that, but then 94, 95, 96, I was doing the, hello and welcome to the ITU World Cup in, China or Mexico. And that was terribly exciting because I got to travel around the world and interview all the athletes. Yeah. And that worked really well because I'd raced with a lot of these athletes and they knew me. They knew that I'd been out there, sweating along with them. They knew that I understood entirely what it was about. So I would interview them and I got really good interviews from the athletes. I interviewed Hamish Carter, who won gold in the Olympics in Athens, and Brad Bevan and all these others, and Emma Carney, and who she didn't win a gold, but she won the Triathlon World Cup series like 4 years in a row. And so, but they would respond to me because they knew that I understood. The men and women both knew.
You had the credibility and they respected
Absolutely.
you, and you had the knowledge of the sport, and you were high in that sport.
Mm-hmm. So that was great fun doing that. It wasn't my forte being on TV. It's not something I'm particularly comfortable with. So when I moved behind the scenes, I did some commentating for the Triathlon World Cup series, and then when I moved into the journalism and the consulting, that was more my thing. And there's some interesting stories there too. I went to a lot of industry trade fairs. There's a big one called SportTel every year in Monaco, and I would go there for my companies. And in the early years, in the late 90s, when you booked an exhibition booth at these sport and media conferences, you would sign up if you wanted like a booth and a table and a set of hostesses who were young French women in very tiny little suits who would, meet and greet and hand out coffee to your clients. And I was gobsmacked by that. It's like, what? I mean, table and booth and screen, yes, but a little group of women in tiny suits? I mean, that's ridiculous. But it was like that. It was very French at the time.
Right.
And that was, it was very male. And I guess of the, 2,000 people who would go to these things, probably at the beginning, maybe 5% were women. And a lot of those women were the hostesses in tiny suits. But it's now much more equitable. There's a lot of women in the business because women do well at business and negotiating, and they have experience, and there's more women involved in sport. A lot of the people do come from a sports background. Right. So it's an obvious career path to get into the agency business or television reporting or broadcasting or whatever. And so you do have a lot more women there. And I do feel quite comfortable going to these events now, but before it was a bit odd. I'd be there in my suit, as representing my company. I'd be asked where the coffee was or if I could get someone a coffee and that kind of thing.
And you just, roll your eyes and go, come on.
Yeah.
And so you've worked all over the world, overseas as well as North America. Do you find there's a difference in ways that maybe females are treated in the industry, or is it pretty much the same wherever you go?
Well, I think in the UK, where I spend a lot of time, and North America, women are treated pretty much equally. And I think in the States and Canada particularly, men have competed in sport with women. They respect women's sport. In Canada, I mean, women in hockey and in rugby, ice hockey, rugby and soccer, the women do better than the men in the world rankings. So I think there is a great deal of respect towards women who come from a sports background or who are involved in sport in the media. And I've never really felt uncomfortable or like I'm being treated in any lesser way. In Europe, definitely. In France particularly, I mean, the French are the ones who offer the hostesses to meet and greet at your booth. I think it has been more difficult there because they're not used to seeing women coming from a sports background. And there is a sort of feeling that the women are there in a more decorative role. It's changed a lot now. There's a lot of very senior women in both sports federations and industry, in broadcasters and agencies. And so I think it's much better now. But still, there's always work to be done, isn't there?
Yes, of course. I mentioned it when I was introducing you when I first started working for the professional soccer club just over 2 years ago. And I was told, I said, Katherine Davies is the one that you want to meet and you want to talk to. And they just spoke so highly of you. And she's the one that you want to, if you want to get into broadcasting, she's just one that you want to learn from. And I've had the privilege of learning from you and getting the opportunity to work with you. And it's been amazing. I think also in that industry, at least on my end, it's been mostly male dominated. It's been male dominated. And to see such a strong, knowledgeable woman in the area that I look up to. I mean, it's been amazing, and I respect it and I appreciate it so much. How do you think that we can continue this? And like, how do women like me, how do women bring themselves into the industry?
Well, I think it's like in any area of business. I mean, I just read Sheryl Sandberg, the CFO or the COO of Facebook's. I read her latest book about leaning in, and you do have to lean in. You have to make your voice heard. You can't sit at the sofa when the men are at the head table. You have to make those steps that make you feel uncomfortable. You have to put yourself out there, and I think for a lot of women that doesn't come naturally. But you have to just understand that you are just as qualified and just as good as the guys and the other women, and it is a level playing field, especially now because we all come from sports background. We've all done sport at school or at university or just recreationally, and we understand sport. And if you've done a broadcasting degree, I know you're doing one, you know just as much as any guy down there. You just have to lean in. And I actually really recommend that book for any woman who wants to get into any business. Just lean in and just self-belief. And also it's really important to find not so much a mentor, but someone who can be your contact to I mean, like I've done for you, I'll put you in contact with anyone. I think you're gold. I think you're going to do really well in your career, and you've done all the right steps, and you're out there putting yourself out there, which is really important. But you need to find someone who can connect you with the right people and who can tell you their stories and all that. And so you realize that, I mean, the stories I have, for example, there's some stories of some blatant sexism and stories of great opportunity and fantastic support from men and women and really embarrassing, awful moments that you cringe and you want to forget, and then moments that you're really proud of and the achievements that you've made. And it's just realizing that everybody has their great stories and their terrible stories, and it's all, it's human experience. It's not men and women.
Yeah. And I think touching on that is, if you are passionate about it and you're wanting to get into the broadcast world or the podcasting, is to follow it and to build those connections, put yourself out there, look for those opportunities. It might not come up right away, but when it does, make sure you're there to grab it and really work hard and give your all to it. But definitely making those connections, I think, is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And just not being afraid to give it a go. I mean, with the Canadian Premier League, I was here working at my previous company, MP & Silva, and I'd known MediaPro for years in Spain. And I'd worked with them for years and reported for them and done some consulting and so forth. And when I saw that the Canadian Premier League was forming and that they were looking for a partner for their media rights, and they were looking mostly in North America. And so I phoned up people I knew at MediaPro, the head of sports rights, and I said, hey, this Canadian Soccer League is forming, and they're looking to sell their media rights. They're looking for a media rights partnership. And he actually happened to be in Paris at the time with the president of MediaPro, Jaume Rores. And he turned to Jaume and he said, this Canadian Soccer League, doesn't sound like much, doesn't sound that great, Canadian soccer, huh? But the president of MediaPro has done a lot of Hollywood films. He's won BAFTAs and Oscars for work with Woody Allen and other films. And he loves Canada because he always takes his films to the Toronto Film Festival. And he just likes Canada, and he likes the whole bilingualism and Canada's politics and all that. So he said, it actually sounds quite interesting. You should look into it. And this was in May of 2018. And in August of that year, I was on a plane to Toronto with Oliver, the head of media rights, to go to Toronto to meet the CPL. And by November, we'd signed the contract with the CPL for 10 years. So it was something, I had this feeling that, MediaPro might be interested. It's the kind of thing they do. And I'm just going to take the initiative and call someone I know and give it a go. And, here we are.
Yeah,
so that's quite exciting.
Yeah,
and it's just, sometimes it's just being brave and going out of your comfort zone and doing something, and you might get shut down. I mean, the number of times I've tried to do things and the door shuts. But it hasn't, I'm just, nothing will keep me down for long. So you just got to keep trying. And I did, and this worked, and I'm terribly proud of seeing Canadian soccer develop.
I love it. I love this league. And watching the girls and the boys just develop all the way up, and having those leagues to branch out to, whether it's the CPL or the MLS or another for the women's, is just seeing them develop and go off. It's amazing.
We really need a women's soccer league here, don't we?
We do. What do you think about that?
Well, I actually, somebody in MediaPro asked me the other day about the Canadian Women's Soccer League and where they're at right now, and I had to respond, well, there isn't one. And she was like, really? But the Canadian women are so good, and they do hockey and everything. And she couldn't quite fathom the fact that there wasn't a professional women's soccer league. And I was a bit embarrassed that there wasn't. And then you look at what's happening in the UK. I mean, the Women's Super League,
Yes.
which is now run as a separate entity from the Premier League and the FA, and they're getting £7 million a year for their media rights. That includes the production, but they're having all their games are covered live on Sky and some games on the BBC.
Right.
In France, the Ligue Féminine they have a rights fee from Canal Plus in Spain, in the Nordic countries, in Germany. They have professional soccer leagues. The women get paid salaries. They're getting money from broadcasters. The Women's Super League from the UK has television rights deals in Mexico and the Nordic countries. I mean, the rights are sold around the world. People are watching this. And that's where it starts. We don't even have a league.
Yeah.
So I know the CPL clubs have a remit to, at some point, create a women's team. And those teams will be part of a women's league. There's other initiatives to create separate women's leagues. There's this ongoing initiative to get an NWSL team in Canada, in Vancouver or Toronto or somewhere else. And however it works, I'd prefer to see a Canadian league,
right,
rather than
just one ticket team.
Well, the thing with if they have an NWSL team in Canada, that's going to be like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal playing in Major League Soccer, which is an American league. It's a foreign league, and they're playing there by permission of FIFA. FIFA lets them play in a foreign league because there isn't a commensurate league in Canada. And so maybe things will change in 10 years or 5 years if the CPL gets really good, and then they might be pressured to play in their domestic league, or they might choose to, or they might not. But I think that having an NWSL team would be great for Canadian soccer, but I think there needs to be a Canadian league. It's just finding the sponsorship and the money and all that, and that's complicated.
And the players, because lots of the teams in overseas are attached to the professional leagues, like the PSG female team, the Man United, all of them, Man
Arsenal,
City, they're
Tottenham,
all, and that's where lots of them go. I think Janine Peckie, we have Jordan Heidema who went to PSG. So lots of them are over there, and then they have such a great core group in the NWSL. So what kind of players are you looking for doing the Canadian Premier League? Or for the Women's League in Canada?
In Canada, well, I think it is going to have to be very well backed to lure some of those women back to Canada. They're getting good salaries in Europe. So we're unlikely to get that level to start with. It's kind of like the Canadian Premier League. You know, it's do you start as a development league, or do you get the big money in and get some of these top players coming back to Canada? They're getting good salaries in Europe. And I think the WSL, the Women's Super League in England, is probably the best women's league in the world right now.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and the French league is terrific. So it's going to be hard to compete. It would be more like I think it would be women who, instead of going to take a college scholarship in the States, might stay in Canada and play for a women's professional league here. Or top club players. It's going to be that sort of level at first. I think it'd be difficult to attract the stars unless there's a great big sponsor television deal.
And I think that's huge, is being able to view the games. Because I know, like you said, the overseas and the NWSL are doing good with being able to view those ones. But in other sports, it's hard to find when women's games are on TV. It's always men's games. It's hard to see the women's games. And I think that's huge. I don't know how we get that on there. But if we have the opportunity to watch these games, which will help it grow, which will bring more attraction, which will show young girls that this is something that they can grow up to and achieve to be, I think is a key component.
The television is hugely important, and I think we're on the way. It is. You look at the Women's World Cup in 2019 and the millions of viewers worldwide they had. And in a lot of countries, I mean, it did take a huge step forward in that in a lot of countries, like in the UK, it was on the BBC. So free to air television, over the air television. And there were lots of stories at the time of, you know, men who'd come home on a Sunday and turn on the television and there were women playing soccer. And it's like, oh, and then they would be captivated by it and they would watch it and they'd say, this is really good. And then all these men became fans. And you now see them wearing, you know, Megan Rapinoe shirts. So I mean, that you see them actually supporting women's soccer, and of course the women watched it, and the audiences worldwide were huge. And I think that was a huge step towards making women's soccer something that's respected by people around the world. And you have soccer national teams in countries in Africa and in Latin America, and they're all starting their own women's leagues, and that's a huge step towards the respect that we need. And the visibility that it requires for it to become, you know, a global sport, and for women to be able to think that they have a career, that there's a possibility for them to follow that track and have a viable career just like men do. there's a lot of challenges for women in sport, both as athletes and as, if you're in the business, if you're in television, and some of the challenges that I went through. I mean, for a while I was a single mother, and that was quite difficult because childcare is an issue. I took 5 years out when I had my daughters. I have twin girls who are now 19, who are good athletes in their own. But there's a lot of obstacles, I think, that women face that men don't, whether you're an athlete or in the business. And the thing about athletes, and just now, a lot of women their sponsors are paying them even when they go out and get pregnant. So they get paid their sponsorship fees for that whole 9 months, year and a half while they're pregnant, in the first years of the first months when their child's born until they return to competition. That's a huge step.
It is huge.
I think Nike was the one that held out the last. They were the last ones to pay their female athletes when they were pregnant.
I heard there's an athlete I want to get on the show, because she was I think she might have been a sprinter, and she was great. And then she went on maternity leave, and they didn't want her back on the team or something like that. But it was because she gave birth. And I believe she kept running. I believe she ran a race. She was like 8 or 9 months pregnant running this race. And I think she came very close, or she won. But she's out there sprinting these races. And then all of her endorsements and everything got taken away, I believe. Something like that. I'd love to have her on a show and hear her story. But it's just kind of unreal in that sense.
Well, I think there's been a lot of there's been a big impact from social media. A lot of people were very critical of Nike not sponsoring their women when they went on maternity leave, and I think that's been very influential. I mean, social media is a force for good, and it can be a force for absolute evil, but it's mostly a force, and generally a force for good and things like that. And I think it's just the general support from the public who see that, well, of course she's still valid and worthwhile, even though she's pregnant, and then she can still race, she can do promotional things, and it's hugely influential and a really important role model thing for young women to see. Oh, she can still be an athlete when she comes back. She's still getting supported by her sponsor.
Absolutely, because I think sometimes that's a thing for young kids or young girls or teenagers who are like, okay, if I do the sports, I might not have a family. Like it's sports and not a family. So to be able to let people know and educate and have role models that show you can have both. You can be a professional athlete, you can win races, and you can have children and have a family. You can do it all, which is having those role models, I think, is such a big deal.
It's huge. And I think in North America we're really lucky, particularly in Canada. I think I know this from my daughters who did sport all the way through school. They did mostly running and individual sports, but it's very different here than it is in the UK, because I think boys and girls grow up playing soccer, and the girls are good at soccer. I've played soccer on the beach with kids that are summer place, and the girls are good. I mean, they're just as good as the boys. They can play on a level field with the boys. And then in things like track and field, girls can run as fast as boys, and they can do. And I think boys here, because they do compete with girls, they see that these girls are good, and there's just a level of respect from boys towards girls in Canada that I didn't see as much in Europe. And I think a lot of it has to do with sport. Boys see girls out there winning races or playing tactical soccer and having the same skills as, before they hit age 13, 14. I think that's really important for boys to see that. And you just don't get that same thing in Europe to the same level.
Interesting.
You have elite sport. Girls are, they play soccer on boys teams, and then they're picked off for elite teams, but you don't have it the way you have here. You have girls leagues here. And when I brought my daughters here and they saw these little girls playing soccer on a field on Saturdays, they're like, what are they doing? All these girls are out there in their little uniforms, their ponytails, playing soccer, and they were entranced by it. And my son too is like, what are they doing? Because you just don't see it in the same way in Europe.
Interesting.
And I think that has contributed to a much more level playing field and a greater level of respect of boys towards girls on the playing field, off the playing field.
Of course,
I do detect that here much more than I do in Europe.
Yeah, I know growing up as a kid, as an athlete, it was the males were very supportive, and there was a respect there to the female athletes. And we would play games. We would get picked first in the leagues, and it was awesome. It was great to have that respect. I also, my cousin down in Montana, I know that she is one of 2 or 3 girls on her hockey team once, and was captain. And I believe that they all voted who the captain was going to be. And they didn't pick her because, oh, she's a girl, we're just just give her the token captain. She earned it. They respected her. She was skilled. She had leadership skills, and she was their captain.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Well, my daughter Maddie made a point about that when I told her I was coming on this podcast, and she made a point that she did track and field, and she's played soccer as well. But when you play soccer, you're playing at a girls' team, at a girls' tournament. You travel away to a school to play other girls' teams, and the boys aren't really observing that in the same way. But when she did track and field, they'd take the boys and girls somewhere, and they'd do a track meet. And if it was the girls' 800-meter race, which is what she did, all the boys would stand there and watch, and she was a good runner, so she'd win these races, and the boys would see this girl winning points for their school, and she just said there was a level of respect that she didn't get in soccer. And so sports like that, like rowing and track and field, I think you really generate a lot of equality among boys and girls, and a real sense of camaraderie. And the boys understand that the girls' races are just as exciting and compelling as any race. Mm-hmm. And I do see that here more than I've seen elsewhere. Just the camaraderie and the respect. And I really like that about sport in Canada.
There was a time where I was playing on a Div 1 team, and we would play against the Div 1 men's team. We would practice at the same time together. And there were times where they did not want to pass to the girls. They said, so we would be mixed teams. We'd have a mix, it would be 2v2, and they wouldn't pass to you. They wouldn't look to you. And we're all Div 1, like, here to play. We're just as strong as you are. So, of course, we would get frustrated. I would get frustrated saying it. So instead of just yelling at them, we would go in physically hard against the other opponent. So it's like, okay, if you're going to treat me like a girl, you don't think I'm up to your level to play and make passes with you. I'm going to show you that I am. And so we would just go in hard tackles, like, safe, but hard tackles, win those balls, and show that we are strong, powerful soccer players.
Fantastic.
And we're here to play.
And did they change their
They
tune
did
after
change.
that? Yeah?
They did. They were like, okay, these girls are here to play. And then you get one pass. And they're like, okay, got a pass. And then it just starts going. The floodgates are open. It's like, okay, now we're playing like a team. Now we have a good camaraderie around us.
That is great. I love that.
Yeah.
My partner's from New Zealand, and he told me a story about, I think it's rugby league, not rugby union, but for kids, they have leagues where it's boys and girls. And teenage level as well, and you have to have a certain number of girls on each team, and they have to be on the field. A certain number of girls have to be on the field at the same time, and if a girl scores, you get double points. Okay. So that's kind of forcing it a bit, but it does make
a little forcing.
It is a little bit forcing. So I'm of two minds about that.
The double points, I think, is a little bit forcing, but I do know in like leagues around here as well. You have to have a certain amount of girls, and there has to be, like when I was doing a volleyball league, there had to be 2 girls on the court at the same time, which I think is great because you do have those men who are not always men, but you do have them say like, you can sit down, we're on the court, and you don't get that chance to play. So I do like those rules that you do have to have a female on, especially if it's a co-ed league or team or tournament. The extra points thing for a goal, I personally don't really like.
Well, I thought about it, and I didn't like it at first, but then I thought they have to pass to the girl, or they have to give the ball to the girl.
Because they want the extra points.
Yeah, and then that sort of foments the idea that, she's part of the team and you have to pass to her, and then they'll see that she's more than good enough to be there. So it's one of those like affirmative action. Do you like it? How much do you like it, or do you not like it? But, yeah. So my jury's out on that.
It's an open. Yeah.
We'll talk about it another time. Yeah.
Okay, that's it for this episode of Her Love of Sports. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to special guest Katherine Davies. To catch all the latest, make sure you follow us on social media at Her Love of Sports and check out herloveofsports.com. Special thanks to our mentors, Dave Shumka, StoryHive Project Manager, Sean Cathcart, and the National Screen Institute.